Hello YouTube! Today, I'll be talking about one of my favorite short stories in the Halo universe. This particular narrative debuted in the Halo Fracture short story collection under the title Defender of the Storm. The story follows a young Forerunner warrior servant serving aboard an exotic particle harvester named Seclusion Spiral, which is located on the surface of a giant storm blazing across the gas giant Seclusion. But there's something unusual about this character in the grand scheme of things, though I'll get to that later. This story takes place toward the end of the Forerunner Flood War. The warrior servant, known as Adequate Observer, begins the story with a question posed to his Ancilla, the artificial intelligence which maintains his combat skin, about something he saw in the storm. Adequate had been assigned to Seclusion Spiral for 15 years, all the while yearning to be relocated to some battleground where he could serve in the war against the Flood. But this elusive transfer never happened, and he felt that he was wasting away, having little to do and seeing no hope for a change. But whatever he had seen in the storm was at least something interesting. Unfortunately, his Ancilla could not confirm that he had seen anything out of the ordinary, and he resigned at first to its assessment. Later, we see Adequate anticipating the yearly transferal of crew. All of the other members of the station had been reassigned to other posts across the galaxy to fight the Flood, and he too had some minuscule hope to receive an order for transfer at the completion of a newly arrived passenger tanker's functions. This was, of course, not to be, and he was left in as bleak a mood as ever after the tanker's departure. He also desired to have as little contact as possible with his new co-workers, seeing that he had nothing much to say to them or even to teach them, as well as the fact that one of them branded him with the nickname Barely Adequate. He took to spending his free time in the station's central hub, where he could be alone while the other 20 crew members patrolled the 5 spokes of Seclusion Spiral. With this solitude in the control hub, he also used one of the station's radar scanners to search for the dark object he had glimpsed in the storm earlier, and he did find something anomalous. However, he was interrupted by a terrible report. The Flood had infiltrated the station. Adequate's Ancilla was able to deduce that the infection originated from the newly replaced waste digester units positioned at the end of each vein in the station's spokes, but not before Adequate had rushed down one of the veins hoping to save a crew member. Before he could reach the endangered warrior servant, named Sprightly Runner, or witness what she had become, he was distracted by the first clear appearance of what he had discerned faintly in the storm. A large, avian-like being, with clear wings and 3 bioluminescent organs in its abdominal or chest region, and it was now hovering in front of one of the station's viewports. It quickly disappeared back into the storm, and, despite the excitement of this discovery, the Flood were still a threat, and little time passed before he was forced to flee from the encroaching infestation. But he found himself caught between 2 bulkheads that had been shut to keep the Flood at bay. His Ancilla suggested that they use one of the transport tubes for the harvested particles, but upon opening a service hatch, they found the nearest tube totally empty. To maintain station equilibrium, all of the veins would have to have been in use. Thus his Ancilla realized that Seclusion Spiral had not been harvesting any particles for an estimated time of upwards of a decade. The young warrior servant eventually made his way back to the central hub through the inner workings of the station. Here, he learned that the communication systems had been knocked out, and that the last survivors had each picked one of 2 spokes in which to make a final stand, not having realized that all of the veins were equally contaminated. After some trial and error, he was able to find the last survivor, a warrior servant named Capital Enforcer, who had been holding out against the Flood with only a bolt shot, the standard issue sidearm, and presumably the only kind of weapon the crew had access to. These 2 agreed that if Capital were infected, Adequate should activate the station's catastrophic response system, considering that Adequate Observer held seniority in the station. What a privilege. Capital Enforcer did fall, and the last remaining crewman decided to destroy the station. But not before realizing why Seclusion Spiral had gone unused for over 10 years. He reasoned that the Forerunners had discovered the avian creatures in the storm and shut down the harvesting systems, possibly to prevent the avians from being damaged or killed, but kept the station populated as a sort of diversion. If the Flood ever discovered Seclusion Spiral, they would take the Forerunner officers but leave the avians alone, believing that any bioelectrical activity was from the station's crew. If the Flood gained access to these organisms, they could weaponize their abilities to attack a planet from orbit, thus waiving the need for a ship to spread the infection. But this was not the end for Adequate Observer. The station's catastrophic response sequence explosively ejected the spokes from the central hub, causing the hub to fall deep into the storm. Using its compensational thrusters, it eventually caught itself in a relatively calm portion of the storm's vortex, which was also the main dwelling of the avian creatures. Adequate found himself alive and with a lifetime supply of sustenance in the hub, which had supplies for the entire crew, and he had a unique species to become acquainted with. At the end of this story, his Ancilla gives him a new name, never again an adequate observer, but a defender of the storm. Now, in the beginning of the video, I mentioned that Adequate, or Defender, is a bit unusual. In a universe full of Spartans, Arbiters, Didacts, and even augmented Marines, Defender's identity as basically an average individual is refreshing. He's not a super soldier bound towards some great destiny, or the leader of a revolution to free his people, although he had dreams of battlefield glory. Of course, I'm aware that there are plenty of average characters in the Halo universe, not blessed with exceptional abilities or power, but many of these are supporting characters, whereas Adequate/Defender is the primary protagonist. He may not have been special, but he was in the right place at the right time, and he acted heroically in the way that he knew how. This makes Defender of the Storm one of my favorite minor characters, which also makes it all the more shame that he likely didn't survive the firing of the Halo array. Thank you all for watching. Please leave a like if you enjoyed, comment down below, and until next time.